Welcome to True Echo, where real stories echo louder than fiction. In today's powerful episode, a black waitress is publicly mocked by a powerful CEO trying to prove a point. But what happens next flips the script, leaving an entire restaurant in stunned silence. This isn't just about languages or ego, it's about dignity, identity, and standing tall in the face of arrogance. Stay until the end, because the quietest voice in the room just became the loudest. Levi Kitchen wasn't your typical lunch spot. Nestled in downtown Phoenix, Arizona, the restaurant had the kind of atmosphere that whispered "exclusive" without needing to shout it. Water glasses came with lemon zest, waiters moved like dancers, and the air always smelled faintly of rosemary and ambition. Kendra Holloway had been working there for 2 years. At 29, she was the kind of person who moved with quiet precision, brown skin, tightly coiled hair pulled into a puff, and eyes that missed nothing. Her degree in linguistics and international relations sat at home, framed but collecting dust. She had mouths to feed, younger brothers to raise. For now, serving risotto paid better than speaking at conferences. It was 12:15 p.m. on a Thursday when Douglas Merriweather walked in. A CEO from California with enough ego to power a solar farm. Silver hair gelled to perfection, blazer too tight on his broad frame, and a voice made for boardrooms. He didn't walk, he entered, like the air should part for him. He was trailed by 3 others, a French woman in a sleek pantsuit, a younger man clearly trying to make an impression, and a middle-aged guy who looked like he hadn't smiled since 2011. They were seated at table 9, Kendra's section. She approached with her usual grace. "Good afternoon. I'm Kendra. I'll be taking care of you today." Douglas didn't look up. "Make sure mine's gluten-free," he said. "I don't trust kitchens unless I see them sweat." Kendra nodded. "Understood, sir. Our chef uses tamari-based soy, not wheat." That made him glance up, not with respect, but surprise. Like he didn't expect her to know that. The woman beside him ordered next, in French, rapid and elegant. She spoke of beurre blanc, wild-caught salmon, and cooking times. Without hesitation, Kendra answered in fluid French, clean pronunciation, polite inquiry, and an offer to double-check with the kitchen. The French woman smiled. "Merci, très bien." But Douglas? He leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "Well, look at you," he said loudly. "Parlez-vous waitress?" Kendra kept her tone even. "It's French, sir." "Yes, I speak it." Then Douglas leaned forward, like he was preparing to really make his point. "Well, if you're so smart," he said, dragging out the words, "why don't you translate this?" He blurted out a sentence in jumbled German. Fast, loud, and half wrong. People at nearby tables turned their heads. His tablemates froze mid-bite. Kendra paused, not because she didn't understand, but because she knew exactly what he was doing. She stared at him, calm and unbothered, then repeated his sentence in perfect German. Then she corrected his grammar, gave the formal phrasing, and translated it into English. "The mind is like a parachute," she said. "It only works when it's open." You could hear a pin drop. The silence around table 9 wasn't quiet, it was heavy. The kind of silence that settles into the bones of a room. A few seconds passed before anyone dared move. Douglas Merriweather blinked, his smirk faltering. "Well," he said, letting out a weak chuckle, "someone's been practicing their lines." "Memorized phrases, right?" "Probably Google Translate." "I don't use Google Translate," Kendra replied evenly, her voice calm but surgical. "But I can explain the context if you'd like." "That quote you used?" "It's often misattributed to Einstein, but it actually predates him. The phrasing you chose used the informal case for of mind, which is a bit clumsy in High German." The Frenchwoman across from Douglas raised an eyebrow and leaned in with a smirk. "She's right. I studied in Berlin. No one uses dein Geist in formal conversation, unless it's a frat boy trying to flirt with his tutor. The younger man at the table snorted and quickly hid it behind a sip of water. Douglas shifted in his chair, clearly caught between anger and embarrassment. But his defense mechanism kicked in. "Well, that's cute," he said, biting the word. All those languages and still taking orders. There it was. The real jab. The one he'd been holding since she first spoke French. Kendra didn't flinch. "I majored in linguistics and international relations at Arizona State," she said, still calm. "Spent a summer in Belgium for immersion. Picked up German from my roommate. Learned Mandarin while doing thesis research. But yes, today I'm your waitress." Douglas scoffed. "So what? You want a trophy for that?" "No," Kendra replied, her smile unfaltering. "I just want to do my job without being mocked for who I am." The weight of that sentence landed hard. Douglas's VP looked down at his plate. The Frenchwoman crossed her legs, her interest now fixed fully on Kendra. Even the air between them had changed. A few moments later, Kendra moved on to the next order, her poise unwavering. But around the restaurant, word had started to spread. A bartender slowed mid-pour. A hostess lingered by the podium a few seconds longer than necessary. People noticed. From the kitchen doorway, Troy, the floor manager, stood watching. He'd seen her handle an intoxicated influencer's tantrum with napkins and grace last week. Now, he was watching again, no intervention necessary. He trusted her instincts. Back at table 9, the atmosphere had shifted from smug to tight-jawed discomfort. Douglas's power play hadn't landed. He hadn't embarrassed her. If anything, he'd handed her a platform and a spotlight. When Kendra returned with still water and bread, Douglas was already preparing his next move. Men like him didn't back down. Not when they were being watched. "You know," he said, quieter now, more pointed, "it's always the ones who think they're smarter than they are that end up in aprons." Kendra placed the water gently, then turned, eyes level. "I'm sorry." "You heard me," he said, leaning forward. "Degrees are fine. But this is a restaurant. Not a seminar. We don't need a professor. We need service." That word. Service. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was the oldest blade in the drawer. The one used to remind people of their place. But Kendra wasn't there to be reminded. "I treat every guest with respect," she said softly. "But I don't forget who I am just because I'm holding a tray." Douglas grinned, condescending. "Yeah. And who are you?" A hush followed that question, like someone had unplugged the room. Even the Frenchwoman straightened. Kendra stood still, her shoulders relaxed, but her words firm. "I'm someone who didn't get to coast through life," she said. "Who earned everything. Graduated early. Speaks 4 languages. Works 2 jobs to keep my brothers in school. And still shows up every morning with my head up." Douglas leaned back again, defensive now. "So what, you want a pity promotion?" "No," she said, pausing, "I just want to finish this shift without being belittled." Right then, Troy stepped in. Calm. Present. "Everything all right here?" he asked, eyes on Douglas. Douglas cleared his throat. "Just a difference in perspective." Troy didn't smile. "We don't allow disrespect here. Not to staff. Not to guests." Kendra didn't need to say anything more. She gave a respectful nod and walked back to the kitchen. Not hurried. Not shaken. Just steady. And that's when it really landed, not just with Douglas, but with the entire room. This wasn't a moment of public shaming. This was a mirror. Douglas had tried to break her. But Kendra wasn't a cracked surface. She was the reflection. Douglas Merriweather didn't say another word for nearly 10 minutes. It was the kind of silence that said too much. He picked at his arugula and quinoa salad, but his appetite had clearly left the table. Kendra had returned to her station, inputting orders and wiping down the pass with the same steady rhythm as always, but now, every movement carried weight. Not because of drama, but because she hadn't flinched. That had power. The kind you can't buy, bluff, or bully your way through. At the table, the Frenchwoman quietly resumed her meal, casting the occasional glance toward Kendra's station. The younger man had his eyes glued to his phone, clearly uncomfortable. The other VP, who had barely spoken at all, kept his fork moving, but slowly, like he didn't want to make a sound. But Douglas? He was calculating. You could see it in the way he tapped his index finger against the side of his water glass. He wasn't used to losing. Especially not to someone he thought was beneath him. And he wasn't done yet. Kendra returned with the entrees, plates balanced with elegant ease on her arm, garnished perfectly by the kitchen, citrus-seared scallops with microgreens, herb-roasted lamb with fingerling potatoes, wild-caught salmon in white wine sauce. She placed each dish in front of them with practiced grace. "Enjoy," she said, offering a nod before turning to go. Then Douglas struck again. "I was just joking, you know," he said, his voice louder than it needed to be. "You ever heard of that? A joke?" Kendra paused, then turned slightly. "I'm sure you were," she said. Her voice was even, almost too calm. She turned to walk away. "Wait," Douglas said, the edge returning to his voice. "You know, in Germany, they wouldn't hire someone like you to do what you're doing now." That stopped everything. Kendra turned fully this time, one hand still resting on her empty tray. Her face was unreadable. "You want to talk about Germany?" she asked. Douglas didn't answer. "Fine," she said. Her voice remained low, but her words were sharp. "I spent 6 months in Frankfurt during my final year. I worked as a volunteer interpreter for a non-profit that helped refugees, Syrians, Congolese, Iraqis. I translated for families who had no idea if they'd be deported the next day. I sat in rooms where my words helped decide whether someone got to sleep indoors or spend another night in the cold." Her voice didn't rise, but the room was suddenly hanging on every syllable. "I translated for mothers separated from their children. For little boys who hadn't spoken since seeing their homes bombed. I didn't just know the language, I used it. To connect. To protect." She took a slow breath. "I was the only American on that team. The only black woman. And every time someone looked at me like I didn't belong, I remembered what my grandmother used to say, your worth isn't measured by who notices it, but by how you carry it when they don't." The room was still. Even Troy, watching from a distance, paused mid-step. Douglas had nothing. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Kendra's voice softened. "So if I'm serving your food today, it's not because I failed. It's because I made a choice, to come home. To take care of my brothers. To hold it down until the youngest makes it through high school without becoming another statistic. That's not a step down. That's strength." The Frenchwoman whispered, "That was beautiful." Kendra gave a small nod, then turned and walked back to the kitchen. And this time, the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Back in the kitchen, the sound of clinking pans and boiling pots felt almost soothing. Kendra returned to her prep station and began wiping down surfaces. Her hands were steady, but her chest was tight. Not with nerves. With release. She didn't plan to say all that. It had just happened. But she wasn't sorry. Troy came in moments later, carrying a cup. "Water with lemon," he said. "Thought you might need it." Kendra took it with a nod. "Thanks." He leaned against the prep table. The owner saw everything. Caught it on the cameras. "She's impressed." Kendra arched an eyebrow. "Didn't know she watched during lunch rush." "She does now." Kendra took a sip, the cold water cutting clean through the tension. "That man out there," she said quietly. "He came in expecting to humiliate someone." Troy nodded. "He did. But he ended up looking in a mirror." Neither of them said more for a while. Back out on the floor, Douglas sat slumped in his chair. He was no longer the man who strolled in like he owned the world. The swagger had drained from his shoulders. His plate remained half full, untouched. And what no one could see yet, what even Douglas didn't realize, was that something inside him had cracked open. Not broken, but opened. And once that door opened, it didn't close the same way again. By 1:40 p.m., the lunch rush had thinned, but the energy around table 9 was still unsettled. Douglas Merriweather sat in silence, arms folded, his food practically untouched. The others at the table stole glances between each other, unsure whether to speak, joke, or pretend nothing had happened. No one moved with confidence anymore. Even the air around the table felt thinner. The Frenchwoman had stopped trying to make polite conversation. Her arms were crossed, lips pressed, clearly disappointed. The younger man looked like he wished he could melt into his chair. And the other VP? He just kept sipping water like it might make him disappear. Meanwhile, Kendra had returned to her rhythm. Refilling water. Thanking a couple at table 3 for their tip. Confirming a gluten-free request for table 7. She'd done this long enough to know, after something heavy drops in the room, the best thing you can do is keep walking with grace. Let the dust settle on its own. But then something strange happened. When she brought the check to table 9, she didn't speak, just placed it on the table inside a leather folio. A folded slip of paper on top. "Whenever you're ready," she said, professionally. Douglas reached for it, opened it halfway, then froze. His eyes lingered not on the total, but the piece of paper she'd left. It wasn't a message. Not a quote. Just a card. Her name, printed cleanly. Kendra Holloway. Multilingual interpreter, English, French, German, Mandarin. B.A. Linguistics and International Relations, Arizona State University. Freelance, available for international client projects. He stared at it. His fingers held it like it burned, like he couldn't decide whether to crumple it or memorize it. Finally, he closed the folio and slid his black corporate card inside. Kendra picked it up without a word and walked it back to the register. At the bar, Troy raised an eyebrow. "That yours?" he asked, motioning to the card in her hand. "No," Kendra said. "It's his." Troy gave a slow nod, like he understood more than she said. When she returned with the receipt, Douglas didn't look her in the eye. He scribbled a signature, added a tip, a large one, and paused. "Kendra," he said. Her name sounded unfamiliar in his mouth, like something he hadn't earned the right to say. She met his gaze. He began, then stopped. The words were stuck. "I didn't mean to, look, I guess I'm used to certain rooms. Rooms where talking over people is just how you get ahead. But, you didn't let it slide." He looked away, then back. "And maybe I needed that." Kendra stayed silent. Not cold. Just neutral. "You didn't expect someone like me to hold their ground," she said quietly. Douglas gave a thin smile. "No. I didn't." He gestured toward the card still in his hand. "You ever think about leaving this place?" "I think about a lot of things," she said. "But thinking and choosing are different." Douglas gave a slow nod. He looked older suddenly. Smaller, somehow. "Well," he said, standing. "If you ever want to work with international clients, the real kind, I know people. You've got more poise than half the C-suite executives I deal with." Kendra didn't react. Didn't beam or thank him. She just said, "I'm glad you noticed." He nodded once more, then turned to leave. His tablemates followed in awkward silence. As they walked out, the Frenchwoman paused near the host stand. She glanced back at Kendra and gave her a small, respectful nod, one that said, "That was masterful." Kendra nodded back. Nothing flashy. Just mutual understanding. Later, in the break room, Kendra sat alone with a protein bar and a paper cup of tea. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She just felt still. Troy walked in and sat beside her. "He emailed," Troy said. She raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Douglas." He held up a tablet, screen glowing. The email was short, but sincere. Subject, "Today." Message: "I came in expecting to control the room. Instead, I got educated by someone with more class and clarity than I've seen in years. Please thank Kendra for her composure. If she's ever interested in a client-facing role in our international division, she has my recommendation." Kendra blinked, slowly. "He wrote that?" Troy nodded. Straight to the corporate inbox. She didn't know how to feel. Gratified? Cautious? She wasn't sure yet. "He's not the first man to underestimate me," she said. "Just the first to admit it." Troy looked impressed. "So? You thinking about reaching out?" "I'm thinking," she said, "that sometimes a lesson only sticks when the mirror finally talks back." She stood, tossed her wrapper in the bin, and headed back toward the dining room. Because the day wasn't over. Her shift wasn't done. And her dignity? It had never left the floor. Kendra stepped back into the main dining area just as the early dinner crowd began to trickle in. Couples holding hands, co-workers in relaxed conversation, and a mother with her teenage son asking if there were any vegan options. The rhythm of the restaurant picked up again, but something had shifted, and not just for her. Troy had moved with purpose that afternoon, making sure every host, bartender, and server knew what had happened. Not the dramatic version, not gossip, but the truth, that Kendra had handled a volatile, arrogant customer with professionalism and grace. Quiet power had rippled outward. By 3 p.m., 3 separate tables had complimented her directly. One woman said, "You remind me of my daughter. You carry yourself like a leader." Another couple, tourists from Oregon, handed her a $20 tip and whispered, "For how you stood up earlier, we saw it all." Even a few kitchen staff, usually too busy to bother, passed by her station and gave nods of respect. Chef Marco, notorious for being a gruff perfectionist, said simply, "You made us proud out there," before turning back to his chopping board. But despite all that, Kendra didn't let it change her pace. She kept moving, kept checking on tables, kept carrying trays with that same poise. Because she understood something people like Douglas never did. Respect isn't earned in loud moments. It's built in quiet ones. Still, she couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. Not the confrontation, but the unexpected offer. The email. The business card in her apron pocket. Troy caught up with her by the ice machine. "Still thinking about it?" She gave a small shrug. "I didn't go to work today to impress anyone. I went in hoping we wouldn't run out of lemon wedges and that table 4 wouldn't order everything well done and bland. Now someone wants to recruit me." "Not someone," Troy corrected. "The same guy who tried to embarrass you in front of half the staff. He saw who you really were when it counted." Kendra leaned against the wall, folding her arms. "It's not about proving anything. I've already done that. It's about whether I want to walk through a door he only just realized existed." Troy looked thoughtful. "That's fair. But sometimes it's not about the person who opens the door. It's about who walks through and changes the room on the other side." She nodded, considering that. Then something strange happened. At 4:45, just as Kendra was getting ready to close out her shift, a woman in a blazer walked in. She didn't ask for a table. She asked for Kendra by name. "Hi," she said, approaching calmly. My name is Dahlia Peterson. I'm with Whitmore International, the firm Mr. Merriweather represents. Kendra blinked. I'm sorry. Are you here to dine? Dahlia smiled. Actually, I'm here on behalf of Mr. Merriweather. He wanted to apologize again, properly this time. And he asked me to deliver this. She handed Kendra a small envelope. Inside, a personal note and a separate business card. The note was handwritten. Not printed. Not corporate. Kendra. I can't undo the arrogance I walked in with, but I can start learning from the people I underestimated. Your grace wasn't just impressive, it was humbling. If you're ever ready to work in a space that sees you fully, call me. D. Merriweather. The new business card wasn't the same one as before. This one was from Whitmore Global, their European division. On the back, a note scribbled in ink, International Client Expansion. Berlin. Paris. Tokyo. Kendra stared at it for a long moment. She felt the room around her fade. She heard her grandmother's voice again, your worth isn't measured by who sees it, but how you carry it when they don't. She folded the card slowly, placed it in her pocket next to her tip money, and smiled. Tell Mr. Merriweather, thank you. And tell him the mirror talked back. Loud and clear. Dahlia grinned. I'll make sure he hears that. As the woman turned to leave, Troy stood off to the side, arms crossed. Berlin, huh? Kendra turned to him, exhaled slowly, and said, it's funny. I used to think opportunities only came when you chased them. But sometimes, they find you when you're just trying to stay standing. He nodded. That's how you know it's real. She finished her shift that day without mentioning it to anyone else. She clocked out, grabbed her hoodie from the back, folded her apron like she always did, and headed out into the pink-orange glow of the Phoenix sunset. The sky was calm. But her mind? Alive with possibilities. She didn't know yet what she would do. But one thing was clear. She would never again doubt what she brought into any room. The sky was streaked with shades of molten gold and violet as Kendra stepped onto the sidewalk outside Levi Kitchen, her apron tucked neatly under one arm. The dry Arizona heat had softened slightly with the fall evening breeze. She took a moment to just stand there, eyes closed, letting the wind brush past her skin. Most days, walking out of work meant a mad dash to the bus stop, grocery list in hand, or checking her phone to see if one of her brothers had texted about needing a ride or cash for supplies. But today felt different. Kendra wasn't used to this kind of stillness. It wasn't quiet because nothing was happening, it was quiet because something had changed. As she waited for her rideshare, her phone buzzed. Text from Malik, 16. Kiki, guess what? I aced my math quiz. Told you all that tutoring paid off. Kendra smiled, typing back. Proud of you. I'll be home soon. We're celebrating, your pick. Malik had no idea what kind of day she'd had. And that was okay. Her job wasn't to share the weight, it was to keep things steady. That was the deal she made with life the day their mother passed, keep the household standing, no matter what. When she arrived home 20 minutes later, she found the apartment exactly how she left it, shoes by the door, a whirring ceiling fan, and the smell of burnt toast Malik had clearly attempted earlier. Darian, the older of the two brothers, was lounging on the couch, flipping through a college course catalog. You okay? He asked. You look like something happened. Good or bad? Kendra dropped her bag and sat next to him. Both, she said. But more good than bad. He looked at her sideways. You finally tell that rude chef where to shove the aioli? She chuckled. No. Not Marco. A customer. CEO, actually. Walked in with a god complex and left with a crash course in humility. Darian grinned. You didn't hit him with the 4 languages and a degree monologue, did you? I didn't have to plan it, she said. It just came out. Then she pulled the folded envelope from her hoodie pocket and handed it to him. He read it silently, eyebrows rising, then flipped the business card over. Wait. Berlin. Paris. Tokyo, he said, sitting up. Sis, this is, major. I know. So are you calling them? Kendra leaned back, staring up at the ceiling. I don't know. Part of me wants to jump on it. But then I think about you too. Malik still has school. Rent's due. If I move halfway across the world, what happens here? Darian frowned. Kendra, you don't have to keep putting your life on hold for us. That's not what I'm doing. Isn't it? She stayed quiet. He shifted closer. I know we leaned on you after Mom. But we're not kids anymore. I've got a work-study job lined up next semester. Malik's got a part-time gig tutoring at the center. We're not asking you to carry everything anymore. Not unless you want to. That struck something deep. Because for years, Kendra hadn't just been the oldest sibling, she'd been the safety net, the backup plan, the one who stayed behind while life kept moving for everyone else. And now, life was knocking on her door. She took a deep breath. What if I go and fail? Darian shrugged. Then you come back. But at least it's your choice. Not the world deciding for you. A beat passed. Then Kendra stood and walked to the kitchen, pulling ingredients from the fridge. Let's eat first, she said. Big decisions need carbs. The next morning, she woke before sunrise, her mind still racing. By 7 a.m., she was walking to the community library, laptop in hand. She'd made this walk countless times. This was where she did her resume updates, job applications, even some freelance translation work. But today felt like her feet were tracing a new version of an old path. She sat at her usual corner desk, cracked open her laptop, and stared at the blinking cursor on a blank email draft for a long time. To Douglas.Merriweather@whitmoreglobal.com. Subject, following up. She wrote. Mr. Merriweather. Thank you for the note and the opportunity you extended. I've given it serious thought. I never planned on being seen that day, not beyond the order pad in my hand, but I'm glad I was. Because not every mirror is meant to reflect shame. Some are meant to show us what we missed. I'm open to having a conversation. On my terms. Sincerely. Kendra Holloway. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. It wasn't a yes. But it wasn't a no either. It was a door. 3 weeks later, Kendra stood in front of Gate A26 at Sky Harbor International Airport, suitcase in one hand, boarding pass in the other. The early morning terminal buzzed with low murmurs, rolling wheels, and overhead announcements. Her hair was braided into a protective crown, her shoes worn but sturdy, and her heart beating with the steadiness of someone who finally said yes to herself. It hadn't been an easy decision. After her email, Douglas replied the very next day, not defensive, not demanding, just respectful. He arranged for her to meet with a liaison from Whitmore Global's international client team over Zoom. Kendra set her conditions clearly: remote training to start, flexible schedule to accommodate her brothers, and an absolute refusal to be the diversity pick. They didn't flinch. Instead, the recruiter, Isabel Tran, a multilingual operations head based in Paris, welcomed her with open arms. We don't need you to code switch, she said. We need you to lead conversations that matter. Kendra didn't say yes immediately. She needed time to build a support system. Darian moved into a full-time schedule and picked up grocery duty. Malik's school counselor helped secure a scholarship fund that lightened the financial load. Their landlord even agreed to a temporary grace period when Kendra explained the situation. For once, everything didn't fall apart when she reached for more. Now she stood at the edge of something she'd never allowed herself to imagine, a role that valued not just her skills, but her voice. A place where she didn't have to explain her intelligence, or justify her ambition. She just had to show up as herself. Before boarding, she texted Troy. "Leaving today. Thank you for backing me when you didn't have to." His reply came seconds later. "You were never meant to stay hidden. Go be undeniable." As she stepped onto the plane, she remembered the moment that started it all, a man trying to humiliate her with broken German. The ego. The assumption. The public test. But what Douglas hadn't realized back then, and maybe never truly would, was that the real test wasn't hers. It was his. He was the one being measured. He was the one who stumbled. And Kendra? She passed without even raising her voice. 1 month later, Frankfurt, Germany. The conference room buzzed with the low hum of simultaneous translation headsets and coffee cups clinking. Kendra sat at the end of a long, polished table, flipping through a translated client dossier. The meeting had just ended, and Isabel leaned in with a grin. "You know," she said, "your voice has weight in here." Kendra smiled. "I didn't come here to be small." That afternoon, during a company roundtable, Douglas joined by video call. He was dialed in from the U.S., visibly more reserved than the man who once leaned back in a chair and barked orders at a waitress. When he saw Kendra sitting at the table, there was no show of awkwardness, just a single, respectful nod. Kendra returned it, then turned her attention to the task at hand. Because this story wasn't about redemption arcs for CEOs. It was about a black woman who refused to be underestimated. It was about what happens when someone stops waiting for the world to validate them and starts claiming the space they already earned. There are moments in life when you don't just speak up for yourself, you speak for every version of you that was overlooked, ignored, or quietly dismissed. Kendra Holloway didn't win the room by shouting. She didn't need to. She stood tall, told the truth, and let the weight of her story carry the lesson. Because dignity isn't given, it's embodied. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm, stay clear, and refuse to shrink. If this story moved you, subscribe to True Echo for more stories that uplift real voices and real power. Leave a comment below if you've ever had to stand tall in a room that tried to make you small. Share this with someone who needs the reminder, you don't need permission to be powerful.